The anime revolves around the protagonist, Orphen, a sorcerer whose superior control over spells since a young age had gained him fame over the world. His close friend Azalie's grave mistake resulted in him having to leave the Tower of Daggers in search for her. He encountered multiple mystical beings on his travels, but his aim remained to save Azalie from a fatal end. The episode starts with the dramatic opening of our protagonist, Krylancelo, rushing into a dimly lit chamber of the Tower of Fangs to reveal two individuals, the male one of whom is unconscious. Kryalancelo's attention, however, was entirely upon the girl who seemed to be in extreme pain. She was sitting hunched, and implored Krylancelo to leave, but he was shell-shocked, and even more taken aback when the girl, whose name is revealed to be Azalie, discloses that the experiment with the sword backfired. Suddenly, Azalie's body begins to mutate, and in a few seconds, she takes up the guise of a dragon that breaks out of the building. A few wizards outside attempt to attack her with spells, but Kryalancelo deflects them, and the dragon gets away. The story continues 5 years after the previous events. Two young dwarves attempt to escape the clutches of a sorcerer they owe money to, and a police officer who seeks them out due to their illegal activities. It is revealed that the sorcerer, whose name is Orphen, is a failed magician who still knows how to perform spells, but this remains a sore point for him. After 5 years, Azalie in the dragon's body makes a short reappearance, but is driven away by a band of sorcerers sent by the Tower of Fangs. Meanwhile, the two dwarves team up with Orphen to scam an influential household called Everlasting Family. But while there, the dragon attacks the mansion in search of the magical sword in their possession. It manages to retrieve it, and once again escapes the clutches of the sorcerers by Orphen's help. Going back in the past, the Tower of Fangs was renowned for its coaching of the mystical arts, and the students with the most potential were taught by the experienced sorcerer, Childman. His abilities were further proven when one morning he sparred with each of his students and was able to repel each of their spells without breaking a sweat. Here we are introduced to a young Azalie who seemed to have the most ability out of all the pupils. At this point, Orphen wakes up in a dungeon cell with the two dwarves and realizes he was dreaming about his time in the Tower of Fangs. Orphen tells the dwarves about how he and Azalie were raised in the tower together, and it is revealed that his name is actually Krylancelo, but he had changed it to Orphen during his search for Azalie. Orphen is then released from the prison and meets with his ex-master, Childman, who tells him about the experiment with the Sword of Baldanders that he and Azalie were trying, which had backfired, leaving Childman in a coma and Azalie in the form of a dragon. Orphen is a bit hesitant in trusting Childman, particularly when he asks for his help in capturing the dragon. However, it was the only option he had of seeing Azalie again, and so he agrees. Orphen teams up with the band of sorcerers in the Tower of Fangs, many of whom included his old friends that he had grown up with. However, his main aim remains to protect Azalie from them, and as soon as he feels her presence, he escapes their company and begins to search for her. He is able to discover the dragon, but it seemed as if the Azalie inside it was unable to see Orphen as it attempted to incinerate the magician. He was rescued by the sorcerers who came to his aid, but Orphen still refuses to cooperate and tries to run away with the dragon sword, which was what the sorcerers were after. Nonetheless, he sees how the dragon has burned alive all of the magicians, and only Childman remains in trying to slay it. Even then, he tries to prevent the chief sorcerer from killing the dragon, which forces Childman to stab him and then finish the job, much to Orphen's grief. Using its final words, the dragon informs Orphen about how Azalie had taken control of Childman's body and had transferred his consciousness to the dragon. As a result, it was Azalie who killed Childman, and not the other way around. Orphen confronts Azalie, who now has the Sword of Baldanders, and uses it to attack him, but is saved by a magical ring that he swallowed. And then, instead of killing the enchantress, he decides to spare her. Once again, the episode begins from the past, centering around Orphen's life in the Tower of Fangs growing up. Childman was away on a mission, and the young sorcerers were up to mischief as always. Comicron, a prodigy with robots of all kinds, had lost control of one of their inventions, which was now attacking the surroundings of the school. Thanks to Orphen's quick thinking and strong ability, he is able to destroy the invention. The next day, Orphen is awakened abruptly by a young, enthusiastic Azalie, who takes him to a run-down and deserted town. It is revealed that this was where Orphen and Azalie had lived before their parents' death, and it was tradition to visit their graves on that date. While in the graveyard, Azalie suddenly disappears, and during his search for her, an ominous voice instructs him to go to the orphanage if he wishes to see her again. At the building, Orphen is sabotaged, and upon seeing Azalie's bloodied face, he loses control and unleashes a destruction spell, demolishing the abandoned orphanage. While grieving Azalie's supposed death, she suddenly appears before him, and Orphen realizes that it was another of her elaborate pranks. He doesn't know whether to rejoice that she was alive or to scold her for worrying him. In the end, he decides on the latter, not wanting to show his real emotions. The time frame then changes back to the modern day, where Orphen travels on a carriage to the town of Tafrem, where the Tower of Fangs was situated. He's accompanied by two blonde-headed friends, Clayome and Magique. Clayome is the youngest daughter of the Everlasting family, intent upon wandering the world, and Magique wishes to learn sorcery from Orphen. Orphen begrudgingly allows them to tag along. Magique shows that he is a quick learner and manages to practically implement the training Orphen gives him. On the way to Tafrem, they stop at a forest to rest, where Magique meets with an attractive girl named Fienna living in the forest, who says she is being controlled by the power of the forest. While conversing, Magique is concerned by an extremist group who are strictly against sorcerers. He is forced to defend himself and Fienna, but is shot and taken captive. Orphen and Clayome manage to track him down, and while surveying the scene outside the camp, he is apprehended. Orphen explains to Clayome how the sorcerers harnessed the power of the gods to create magic, and how it was initially only the 7 beasts that had the ability to control the supernatural energy. There were some humans who themselves were unable to perform magic, and so were envious of the ones who could. These individuals teamed up to form cults that worshipped the ancient beasts, and they made it their aim to get rid of the sorcerers. While in hiding, Orphen is shocked to catch a glimpse of one of the mystical beasts, a wolf, or also known as Fenrir. He sends Clayome to inform the closest security station about the situation and attempts to break into the camp himself. Although he gets through the guards, the Fenrir confronts him and, using his psychic abilities, knocks out Orphen. The extremist cult is all riled up at this point, and it is Fienna who acts as a medium for the mystical beast, informing the people of the village that the Fenrir intends to kill both the sorcerers. Orphen wakes up in a daze in the village prison, faced by the chief, McDougal, who constantly has a gun pointed at him. McDougal taunts the young sorcerer, and then informs him that he will question him the next day while leaving the dungeon. Fienna then brings food to heal Magique and tells him how she had healed him right after he had been shot using the power of the forest. Just as they seem to be getting along, their meeting is cut short by the appearance of McDougal, who tells Fienna to hurry up since they would be leaving early the next morning. Magique implores Fienna to come along with them, but she refuses, saying that she was unable to leave the forest yet. He remains adamant on taking her with him. Orphen agrees, since she had mentally healed him after the attack by the Fenrir. By then, Orphen manages to escape the bars of the prison, but is halted by a guard who calls him by his old name, Krylancelo, much to Orphen's surprise. The guard introduces himself as Salua Solud, the personal assistant of Kim Luck Church. But right before he's able to make another move, Clayome appears and knocks him out from behind. When Salua regains consciousness, he's greeted by the sight of his own sword in Orphen's hand, who demands to be led to McDougal. Orphen awakens the chief, who is taken aback and instantly attempts to shoot the sorcerer, but to no avail, and instead fatally injures himself. McDougal, in his last words, tells Orphen that he had intended to harness power even stronger than the beasts because he was very aware of the ill intention of the Kimluck Church and wished to stop them. When the villagers discover McDougal's corpse, they panic and rush to Fiena's house to ask her for guidance. Here, Orphen urges them to not continue McDougal's mission to travel to the middle of the forest since it would be life-threatening, as the mystical Fenrir's abode was situated there. By this time, the Fenrir appears in the village, intent upon destroying it as it had found out about the villagers' plan. Miraculously, Orphen manages to fight off the psychic effect of the Fenrir, and then combines his abilities with magiques to defeat the great beast. However, it was not killed, and with the last of its power was about to destroy the village before Clayome used its own child to finally incinerate it. The episode ends with Magique having to bid goodbye to Fiena, who chose to travel on with the villagers. Surprisingly, Clayome decides to keep the child of the Fenrir, since it was adorably small and easily manageable, and she even names it Lecky. After days of traveling, the group finally reached the outskirts of Tafrim, where the image of the Tower of Daggers can be seen across the skyline. However, a mystery awaits them inside the city's walls. An unknown individual has taken it upon himself to assassinate some of the elders of the tower. The situation had become so concerning that the chief of the tower gave the command to kill the assailant on sight. Side by side, a sorcerer named Forte shares his suspicions with his fellow sorcerer Letitia regarding Orphen that he might be behind the murders, since they thought he had already killed Childman. While still outside the city, Orphen comes across his fair share of mystery as a police officer who was just in contact with him was killed, and a note was left behind asking him, quote, "Who is the successor?" His caravan is then attacked by a young sorcerer whose strength outmatches even that of Orphen, but is unable to lay even a scratch on Clayome, since she was carrying Lecky. Just when it seemed that Orphen would get overpowered, he is saved by a member of the Tower of Daggers, who also used to be his classmate in Childman's special group. Upon seeing her, the assailant casts a spell to disappear, but not before he reveals his face, which was the spitting image of a young Orphen. The woman introduces herself as Letitia and does the group a favor by taking them into Tafrim in her own carriage. Here, she talks about the mysterious murders taking place and even tells Orphen that Forte suspects him. Letitia then showcases her generosity and offers them a place to stay at her house, which was previously Orphen's residence growing up. At nightfall, Orphen is once again confronted by the doppelganger assassin, but no amount of questioning enlightens him regarding why he looked so similar. Letitia informs Forte about the similarity and the features of the mysterious murderer and Orphen, but both remain in the dark regarding his original identity. The next day, Orphen wanders the mansion ground in a gloomy mood, reminiscing about the change he had undertaken once he had left the Tower of Fangs 5 years ago, in search of Azalie. Even Letitia seemed to be lost in her own thoughts, reflecting upon her days in Childman's class, where she was repeatedly outshined by Orphen, much to her jealousy. The young Letitia once became so overcome with envy that she challenged Orphen to a sparring match, which he won with apparent ease, making the apparent gap in their skills even more obvious. Back to the modern day, Letitia summarizes the situation of the Tower School, which had lost all order after the disappearance of Childman. There were assassination attempts on the life of the new head, Forte, and even Letitia was running out of ideas on how to proceed. Suddenly, Magique runs in and informs the two sorcerers that Clayome had been kidnapped by the assassin, much to Orphen's fury, who immediately sets out in search of her alone. Orphen deemed it too dangerous to take his trainee Magique with him, and while waiting at the mansion, the young sorcerer is told about his master's dark past, how he was destined to join the sacred 13 apostles, but because he attempted to murder an innocent messenger, his position was lost, and he left the city a disappointment. However, the rumors did not dampen his respect for his master, and along with Letitia, rushed to his master's support. By this time, Orphen had managed to track down the assassin, who discloses that it was previously a robot, but Azalie used the Sword of Baldanders to transform it into the spitting image of a young, more ruthless Orphen to keep an eye on the sorcerer. Orphen is enraged and uses his anger to finally end the assassin. Azalie then reveals herself and requests his help in her quest to find out Childman's secret, However, Orphen sees too much negativity in her and refuses. Azalie disappears while vowing to meet him again. While wandering the mansion grounds alone at night, Cléome meets with Azalie but is unable to recognize her since she saw the enchantress for the first time. They have a short conversation before Azalie vanishes. Meanwhile, the Tower of Daggers was attacked and the assailant demanding the Brown family's atlas, but was infuriated to find out that it was in Childman's possession. Back at Letitia's mansion, Orphen finally decides to enroll Magique in the Tower of Daggers School of Sorcery, while Cléome plans to tour the new city with Letitia's trainees. On the way, Orphen's carriage is ambushed, but the sorcerer easily subdues the threat, after which he is met by a higher member of the tower named Hydrant, who offers to escort his caravan. Once Orphen reaches the tower, he's immediately summoned by Forte, who brings him up to date with all the controversy taking place there. The students of Master Uor Curlain, known for their homicidal abilities, were getting out of control, particularly since Childman was no longer there to oversee matters. Forte also suspects they are behind the assassinations taking place across the city. Hearing this, Orphen is incensed and immediately goes to confront Uor, warning him to not even think of raising a finger on his comrades. While returning back to the mansion, Cléome is attacked by a masked hydrant whose appearance is still discernible by his scarred eye. Letitia prevents Orphen from pursuing the attacker and instead chooses to hunt him down herself. However, Orphen is not convinced and after healing Cléome and dropping her at the manor, attempts to track down Letitia. She is lured by a masked man to an abandoned building where Hydrant and his accomplice attempt to capture her. However, she is saved by the presence of Azalie, whose presence stuns the two assassins, who then vanish. Letitia wakes up back at her mansion with an enraged Orphen right at her bedside. Knowing his reckless nature, she implores him not to take on Uor and Hydrant by himself, and to instead report it to Forte. Orphen agrees, but right as he leaves the manor, he is met by Azalie, who informs him that Uor is at his plan's final step, which was to kill all his enemies and seize the Browning family's atlas, which the enchantress reveals contained ancient magic and the source of Childman's powers. It turned out that the book was in Magique's possession after all, since he had found it in Childman's library. Azalie then proposed that Orphen should travel to the Tower of Daggers and put an end to the threat of Uor once and for all. Despite Cléome and Magique's immature behavior, he decides to take them along with him as backup. The three manage to sneak into the Tower of Daggers, where Orphen is attacked by Hydrant, whose motivation for assaulting the sorcerer was revenge. It is revealed that it was Orphen who had scarred Hydrant's eye 5 years ago, which was the reason he was not inducted into the Sacred 13 Apostles. An epic battle ensues, at the end of which Orphen's superior ability prevailed, and he defeats the assassin. Meanwhile, Magique is attacked by Hydrant's accomplice, but his training under Orphen allows him to be able to confidently defend himself before Forte comes to his rescue. Impressed with Magique's potential, the skilled sorcerer offers to become his teacher once the battle is resolved. Orphen then made his way to Uor's office, where the chief assassin awaited them with his students and the Browning family's atlas in his grasp. However, upon opening it, Uor realizes it was actually Cléome's diary, which Orphen had switched with the original atlas, that had the same cover. Enraged, Uor attempts to attack Orphen, but Forte intervenes, announcing that he and his students were arrested for the murders of the elders and other criminal activities. When Uor refuses to give up silently, Orphen uses a skill taught to him by Childman to put an end to the chief assassin and finally eradicate the threat created by his students and him. At the end, it is revealed that Forte and Azalie had been working together against Uor, and Orphen's help was what they required to finally succeed. Before Orphen can reprimand her any further, Azalie bids him goodbye and disappears into a portal with the Browning family's atlas in her possession. That's all for this video. Please make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more recaps on all your favorite anime shows. You don't want to miss out. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.